So it's Friday, December 5th, 2025, and the question that we want to address, the looming question as I look at the news is Donald Trump a friend or foe of Ukraine? And even more broadly, is he a friend or foe of Europe? It's an open question right now. Let's look at some of these articles and we'll see what's going on. Closed-door negotiations between the Ukrainian and U.S. delegations have concluded in Miami. No details have yet been disclosed. This was the second round of talks after Geneva. But as we look at this, we're seeing things like this. We see Ushakov talking in very glowing terms about Kushner. That might not be the best thing if you're a supporter of Ukraine. He said, quote, "I personally believe that if a plan for settlement continues to be drafted on paper, it will largely be Mr. Kushner holding the pen," said Ushakov. Okay, well, let's look at this. Kyiv Post, at Miami talks, diplomacy takes a backseat and Europe takes alarm. Let's look at this here as U.S. President Donald Trump's envoys host Ukrainian officials in Miami. A session billed as high-stakes negotiations over the next phase of talks with Russia. America's closest allies are watching with rising panic. Their fear is less about what will be said than how the U.S. is approaching the talks. Trump's negotiating team, according to European and U.S. officials, is being run not by career diplomats, but by two confidants with no formal experience in foreign policy, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Neither has any background in Russian politics or European security. European and U.S. diplomats have told the Kyiv Post that Witkoff and Kushner's experience is in stark contrast to the Trump administration official who should be running point on the U.S.-Russia talks, but is now relegated to the sidelines. That's Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio's absence is deafening, a senior Western diplomat told the Kyiv Post. If the Secretary of State isn't at the table for war-ending talks, something is very wrong. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Something's very wrong with this picture, but this is how Trump wants to do this. Der Spiegel published what it said was a leaked transcript of a private call between German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and President Volodymyr Zelensky. Merz and Macron warned Zelensky bluntly that Washington may be preparing to betray Ukraine with rushed concessions to Moscow. Merz also added that the U.S. is playing games with both you and with us. Rubio's name is never mentioned in the transcript. Yeah, because Rubio is the guy that kind of gets it, and Witkoff and Kushner are on a very, very different page. Now, we also saw this. U.S. promises pre-Christmas arms boost for Ukraine, but pushes for Europe-led NATO by 2027. Senior U.S. officials warned European partners that while military aid to Kyiv is set to rise, Washington will no longer anchor NATO's conventional defenses past 2027. There's a huge doctrinal shift. My very last video, I talked about it with Greg Terry. We were analyzing what happened with the strategy that just came out, the 2025 strategy document. It's something. Okay, Merz throws its full weight behind the EU and Belgium to share the risk burden, and it's going to Brussels to press Bart de Wever to let Europe use frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's defense. It's refreshing to see this German chancellor step up, even if Belgium seems unlikely to budge. Now, that's an interesting thing. Belgium unlikely to budge? What's going on? Well, here, so let's go back to this. Again, the Trump team privately told European allies the U.S. will end its role as NATO's main conventional defense provider. Again, this is documented by Kyiv Post's Alex Rafugulu. So we see that that's there. And then we also saw the national security strategy that I was just talking about. It's not like the past national security strategy. It's really like something very, very different, a whole new direction. The new strategy clearly shows a shift in values from liberal internationalism to sovereigntist national framework of America first. But it's more than that. Look, I'm a Republican. I lean kind of more toward a nationalist than internationalist framework myself, but we have to play in the broader world. So while I don't want to get into every internationalist agreement myself, I'm not like this, but it's just something watching this. The document normalizes a world of competition between great powers and balance of powers and declares the primacy of nations. That's not where I am, because I understand that when the U.S. withdraws, a vacuum's created. And then what's going to happen, according to this document, if it plays out the way this document is, then there's going to be regional spheres of influence between like the U.S. and then maybe China's going to have its sphere, and maybe Russia will have a Eurasian sphere of influence. And it's just asking for trouble. So old school Republicans like me kind of are nationalists who recognize you have to be involved internationally. We're not ardent internationalists. Let's make all international law with everybody else. But where Trump is and where this document is, it blew way past us into, nope, we're not playing with that anymore. The U.S. de facto agrees with the idea of dividing the world into theaters and spheres of responsibility of major players. I talked about that. If you go to that document, you will look at it and go, man, they sure talk about hemispheres and regions a whole lot in that document. This is most clearly seen in the section on the Western Hemisphere, quote, Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, unquote, and the formula for preventing non-hemispheric competitors from gaining strategic assets and control in the region, a signal of American primacy in its own backyard. The second main theater for the U.S. is the Indo-Pacific. Everything else is, off on the side. That includes Ukraine, and that's part of the big change here. There's also a noticeable change in the rhetoric regarding NATO. The National Security Assessment in 2025 recognizes the idea of NATO as an alliance that must be, quote, perpetually expand. It criticizes that idea that it must perpetually expand. It essentially wants containment of NATO. It's almost mind-blowing. Okay. And so it's just a very different place than where we were before. The new U.S. security strategy includes a clause on containing NATO expansion and criticism of Europe. And the criticism of Europe is like the way that Republicans see Democrats in the U.S., that's the way that these Republicans who are writing this document are seeing the West writ large, like Europe, as an enemy, like a political enemy, as in the United States. As opposed to the West, they're our allies. They're Democrats. Like, they may be more liberal than us, but yeah, they're still like us in the sense that their system of government is democratic. And there's also we're not going to tell you what to do in your own country kind of clause, where we're going to respect however you are in your country. So you can be an authoritarian dictator in your own country, and that's okay. Let's make a deal. It's something. It refers to the conflict in Ukraine as the Ukraine war without mentioning Russian aggression, which is kind of troublesome and problematic. Now, Europe has to move faster now. The Witkoff-Kushner team has discovered the Russian sovereign assets as a golden opportunity, literally, for their own dealings with Moscow. Don't underestimate how attractive $200 billion are to these guys, says Janis Klug. Janis Klug is from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Breaking, this is Sir William Browder saying the U.S. lobbied several countries in the European Union in an effort to block EU plans to use frozen Russian assets, central bank assets, to back a massive loan to Ukraine, according to European diplomats familiar with the matter. Now, I just read a couple days ago, the U.S. was pushing to make sure that all the frozen Russian assets returns to Russia after this is all settled, which is very different than using that to perhaps reconstruct Ukraine, which I'm not sure how the reconstruction of Ukraine is going to happen without that at least being in play. Bart de Wever, the Prime Minister of Belgium, is now saying Russia will not lose the war. And he's expecting Russia to surrender its assets is unrealistic. Pushing them too far could lead to catastrophic consequences, especially with nuclear weapons. Seizing assets will likely trigger severe retaliation. So he wants to make sure if they're doing anything, all of Europe is doing it, not just Belgium. He's very much sounding like Orban or Fico in this. It's really bizarre to watch. Merch to the rescue. EU races to bypass Belgium on Russia's $210 billion after weeks of deadlock and rising fears that the U.S. wants a cut. Look, I've told you before, I don't think they should seize the Russian assets. I think you're going to monkey with the entire financial system by doing that. But the way that they've been doing this is splitting the difference. It's not seizing the assets. It's using the interest from the assets for loans to fund things. Okay, so that's not terrible. But it's not because I don't because I wanted to go back to oligarchs or anything like that. It's just you have to be careful with the financial system, and I've explained that before in past videos, so I'm not going to belabor it. But this is what the U.S. was wanting to do is very different than my position in the sense that they're thinking like, yeah, just bring it all back, like as part of the deal. Okay, some people in the U.S. want to gain some economic benefit from a possible settlement of the Russian war against Ukraine, says Merz. Today, the German chancellor will hold an unscheduled meeting with the Belgian prime minister in the format of a private dinner to discuss the possible use of some of the frozen assets for a reparation loan to Ukraine. Head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will also be present at that meeting. Now, what can the EU do? Because really, Trump is kind of doing all the dealing here, or Trump's team is doing all the dealing here, and the Europeans seem like they're sidelined. So the G7 and the EU, they plan to completely ban the transportation of Russian oil by sea. That would be a good move if they can do it. It's also going to tick Putin off in a big way, and it could cause an escalation, but you know, that'll stop the oil from flowing. We have to see how this will play out. Currently, more than a third of Russian oil is transported by Western tankers, mostly to India and China. The rest is carried by what's known as the shadow fleet. If the G7 and the EU get their way, this new restriction will effectively block not just the purchase of oil, but also its transportation, delivering a powerful blow to Russian export revenues. And if this goes through, a new ban will likely be part of the next EU sanctions package scheduled for early 2026. It would be remarkable if they could pull something like that off. That would have probably the greatest impact of anything that's been done so far to cause Russia to have to rethink what they're doing. European leaders are also considering liquidating $2.34 trillion in U.S. bonds if Trump continues along as a toy of Russian dictator, says Jay in Kyiv. That's just commentary. But again, the Russian economy is only $1.8 trillion. The Europeans hold $2.34 trillion in U.S. bonds. They could do that, but the retaliation for doing something like that of, okay, we're going to tariff you 300% or whatever Trump comes up with, I don't know that that's going to be a good idea. It's better to play nice than to try to push hard in this instance. Anything you can do to keep Trump on board in a meaningful way is probably better, but Trump seems like he just wants to be allied with Russia. I mean, that's what all the indicators are that he seems to be wanting to do more of this, to realign the world where Russia comes back into the fold. Donald Trump, friend or foe? That's where I got the title from, this article. Europe is increasingly choosing the latter. According to a new Legrand Continent Cluster 17 survey, 48% of Europeans now consider the U.S. president an enemy of Europe. And I explained why Republicans, and not all Republicans like me, I don't see Europe this way, but the MAGA Republican crowd sees Europe this way, like they're an enemy, like progressive Democrats are the enemy within the United States. That's 4 points higher than in September, and the trend is growing. Seeing Trump as a threat is a dominant view in several key EU countries, around 62% in Belgium, 57% in France, and a clear majority in Spain. Yep, that's changing. And, you know, some things like the Greenland thing and Denmark, or, you know, we're going to seize Canada and make it a 51st state or whatever. All that blustering didn't help, I'm sure. Okay. Now, the U.S. is slowly drifting away. Well, not slowly. It's actually pretty quickly. What you see in this chart here is aid to Ukraine. In blue is European support for Ukraine. In black is American support, and that just dried up in the first quarter and second quarter of 2025. Now, they're still selling it, but it's not the same as they're allocating this money for Ukraine. So really, the Europeans are paying the bill at this point. War in Ukraine. Now, again, it's really interesting how the Russians act in their playbook. They did the same playbook in the United States, according to the Mueller report, where they would amplify Black Lives Matter kind of voices and white supremacist voices at the same time in order to create chaos within the United States. Go look at the Mueller report for yourself. You'll see that. So here we see this. War in Ukraine. We must not make war on the Russians. We must reach an agreement with them, asserts Jean-Luc Mélenchon, leader of La France Insoumise. I know I slaughtered that name. I'm not pretending that I understand how to pronounce French names. Now, Gary Kasparov said, helpful reminder that Putin supported both the far right and the far left in France. His natural allies are the far right, but the important thing is to empower the extremes to weaken the center. Yep, that's the playbook. Empower the extremes, make them fight with each other. Now, I'm a conservative guy. I'm pretty far on the conservative right. I've been there for 35 years, but I'm also not kind of being a jerk about it. Let's have a civil conversation. You can tell me why you think I'm wrong. I can tell you why you think you're wrong. We can do it over a cup of coffee. That's fine. Those days seem like they're gone now, and we're just into yelling at each other and deplatforming each other, which is unfortunate. More evidence emerges that the recent programs of painting swastikas around French cities, as well as a placement of pig heads at French mosques, is the work of Russian intelligence. They're stirring the pot. It's the same playbook. They're just doing it in other countries. Aimed at stoking division between Muslims and Jewish communities, this is only a recent installment of a decades-old Russian government project. So that's how the Russians roll with this kind of thing. All right, let's turn our attention to Trump here at the FIFA awarded Trump the World Peace Prize. This is a brand new thing that they just made up. The award was established just a month ago. Video showcases Trump's role in ending military conflicts. It was shown during the draw for the 2026 World Cup in Washington. The video included excerpts from the official presentation. And so Trump was being awarded this thing. This is your Peace Prize. It's also a beautiful medal that you can wear everywhere you want to go. And so they hand him a medal, a gold medal. He's very fond of gold, as you're aware. And there it is. So he's gotten his Peace Award. And this is, I mean, it's sucking up to Trump. Was he instrumental in bringing some of these conflicts around the world to an end? Okay. Yeah. I mean, let's give him his due. But all right. Maduro, meanwhile, is living his best life. Here's Maduro in a studio singing a song. War, no war, he says. And he's dancing around to some techno music, or dancing in a seat to some techno music. And yeah. So Maduro's got a problem coming down the pike here. I don't think that it's going to be very long before something's going to kick off in Venezuela. And that's part of that hemisphere thing with the security, the 2025 security statement that just came out. And yeah. Okay. Couple last things. I want to give a shout out to DGB, a board member. Thank you. A Patreon board member. Thank you very much for your support, DGB. Today is Volunteer Day in Ukraine. Without thousands of people from all over the world who donate for Ukraine, the situation would have been much worse. And frankly speaking, maybe Russia would have won. Thank you, everyone who donates, who helps Ukraine otherwise. And in whatever way you help Ukraine, thank you very much. I want to say thank you as well. Last little bit, Euromaidan Press. 31 years ago today, Ukraine signed away the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances from the United States, United Kingdom, and Russia. Russia violated the agreement when it annexed Crimea in 2014, shattered it entirely with a full-scale invasion in February 2022. Quote, a piece of paper that has become synonymous with a failed security arrangement, Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha wrote. And here's Darth Putin saying, on this day, 1994, Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum guaranteeing Ukraine's territorial integrity in exchange for their nukes, 44 Ukrainian heavy bombers Tu-22 and 1,068 Kh-55 cruise missiles, which have been fired at Ukraine in this war. That's it, my friends. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.